Crystal Stokes here with Get Stoked, a podcast with real and raw conversations with leaders of all types, business owners, managers, executives, and more. Get stoked by their honest and insightful stories and key takeaways that you can use to improve your leadership abilities. Now, if you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe and share it with others. Your support and feedback really makes a difference. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. Hey everybody, Crystal Stokes, and I am here with Steve Scheier. And Steve, I'm going to pass you the mic and ask you to introduce yourself.
Wonderful, Crystal. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. Really appreciate it. My name is Steve Scheier. I have been working in cannabis since 2018. But before that, I had a long career in marketing and human resources. I worked at Apple for 9 years, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth in the 1980s. And for the last 4 years, I've been doing a lot of work in the cannabis space, helping the cannabis sector develop greater leaders. I'm the author with my good friend Michael Ashley on this book, Power Up, Essential Tools for Cannabusiness Leaders. And it's my pleasure to be here today, Crystal. So thank you very much for having me on the show today.
Absolutely, Steve. I'm glad you're here. We were introduced through a few mutual friends and contacts in this world of coaching. And something that was especially interesting to me that I didn't know until we had our first conversation around leadership, that's what this is all about, is that you specialize in the area of power in leadership. And that's what we're going to be chatting about today.
Power is something that has always fascinated me. When I was a lad in the early 1960s, I was really fascinated with the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was about 10 years old in 1960, 62, I guess it was. And I wasn't really afraid, like hiding under my desk afraid. I was really fascinated by how are these two world powers going to get out of this without blowing each other up? What are the things that are going to create more friction? What are the things that are going to disengage friction? So I've always been interested in that. I read The Prince when I was like 14 years old. Machiavelli has a very bad rep in many Western circles, and Eastern circles for that matter too. But really, Machiavelli was really trying to tell people about power and how to utilize it. It's always been a subject which has fascinated me. My early work in the California legislature, my work at Apple has always been focused on power, who has it, who doesn't. And in the last 15 years or so, I've been really interested in driving power down in an organization. For about a decade, I worked in nonprofits. I was a nonprofit consultant. And my major focus during that period was creating systems and structures where more people could have more decision-making. Because as I was working in my last nonprofit, I looked around and saw everybody running the nonprofit look like me. And everyone who was staffing the nonprofit did not look like me. And I felt, these nonprofits, all the nonprofits that I worked with, they never have enough time, people, or money. But if they could just focus on improve and drive decision-making down in their organizations, they would be much more effective. So I've been interested in power. I'd like to, if I could, quote a passage from my book, if that'd be okay.
Please do.
It is by the distinguished professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter at the Harvard Business School. She wrote, "Power is America's last dirty word. It's easier to talk about money and much easier to talk about sex than it is to talk about power. People who have it deny it. People who want it do not appear to hunger for it. And people who engage in its machinations do so secretly." I want to have more fulsome, direct, transparent conversations about power. This is what my practice is about. I want to encourage people to advocate for power, and I want them to be successful in doing so, because I believe that everybody can be powerful. And I also believe that power is out there in the world. It wants to find a vessel. It's going to be you or somebody else. Let it be you. So yes, we'll talk about power. We'll talk about leadership. And we'll talk about this term that makes people really nervous, which is power.
Oh, okay. I want to play the devil's advocate. What if I'm listening and I feel power, like, it's bad. It causes problems. Maybe it's evil. How do you speak to that initial resistance I might be feeling right now, just with the idea of listening to this?
Oh, absolutely. People are resistant to power. That's what that Cantor quote is about. People are very comfortable with it, and I don't want them to be. We did a consulting engagement, I think in 2014 and 15, with a prominent nonprofit in the Bay Area. There was a woman in the senior management team that we really were encouraging to advocate for more power. It's not that she didn't want to. I finally had a chat with her and she said, Steve, I just don't want people to think that I'm power hungry. She was letting her beliefs about power and about how people would see her curb her ability to advocate for power. Mm-hmm. I believe that people advocate for what they can do. And what we want to do as human beings is encourage growth, right, Crystal?
Absolutely.
We want people to grow, and they grow by getting out of their shells, by advocating for power and for decision making. And so the work that we did, which I think was very effective, is that we talked in our engagements around in nonprofit land. We talked about power. We talked about why people were afraid about it. We gave them specific language that enabled them to advocate for power. And then they stood up in front of their manager and said, this decision, we gave them the words. This is why it's so important. This decision is important to me. I would like to advocate to do it. Mm-hmm. Now, lots of times as a manager, you don't know what people want to do. Yeah. And oftentimes people get frustrated because they say, why don't people advocate for more responsibility? Why don't people step up to the plate? Well, it's because you've not created the environment which enables them to do that, right? And so if you have a language, if you have a protocol to encourage people to speak up and advocate for power, mm-hmm. and if you then give them that power, now you can also say, no, I don't think you're ready. But then you're having a more fulsome conversation. You're having a conversation about it rather than people just walking around in the dark and not knowing what they can advocate for.
Mm-hmm. You're bringing it to light, and now we can work on it. We can have a step-by-step plan. If you're not ready, let's figure out what needs to happen to get you there. And if you are ready, then let's work together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Question for you.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Do you have any synonyms for power? Like if we're talking, language is such a delicate thing, and I'm thinking, what are some other ways we could describe power? I want to make sure this lands with everybody so they can have their own way of relating to it.
Right. Because people bring, as I know, their own thoughts and feelings about power. They bring their family dynamic about power. They bring their prior jobs. They bring their relationships. And because we don't talk about power, it all gets messed up in one, really stinky kind of cauldron of anxiety. And that's not what we want to do. Having power is your human right. You have a right to self-determination. So the word that I would say is self-advocacy. You have a right and that's what we talked about in our work in the nonprofit space. We talked a lot about self-advocacy. And that's if you asked for a word, that's the word that I would offer up, self-advocacy.
I like that. Great. I was thinking of, as you were speaking, for me, what came up personally was desire. Something mm-hmm. I want to go towards or, and pursue. And another one, I was imagining fire, like heat mm-hmm. that cooks things and makes things happen and creates reactions. And I don't know, that's what came up for me personally as I listened to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people are interested in my work around decision-making, they could take a look at my other book, which is called Do More, Good, Better. It's available on Amazon. It came out in 2015. It's all about the nonprofit space or working in the nonprofit space, but really in truth, the ideas, the language, the processes that are in there could be used in any organization. The truth of the matter is that when we come into an organization, the first thing we're thinking about, I think, is how does this place work? Mm-hmm. We know what the org chart looks like, or we hopefully know what the org chart looks like. We have some idea, but no matter how good the interviewing process is, you never really know. you have some idea about what your job is about. But what you don't know about and what you're on the lookout for from the very first moment is who has power, who doesn't, who feels uncomfortable with power, who doesn't. And those are the things we're trying to figure out. And what I wanted to do when I was a VP of HR in the nonprofit space is to clarify that, because it's an incredible time waster. If you're trying to figure this stuff out when I can just tell you, when you don't know what our point of view about power is, if you don't know that our point of view about power is that we want you to advocate for power, then it's a complete waste of time. And we don't have, whether it's cannabis or nonprofit or for-profit, organizations don't have time to waste.
Yes, I think you make a great point. And I wanted to bring it back to your book, because you had talked through it. I think there may have been 4 different sections. Was that right? We had
Yeah.
And I wonder if it'd be helpful to talk through the different elements of power, how you break it down systematically to help people work through this relationship with power.
Right. Thank you for this opportunity. Absolutely. The first thing is that we define power. Power, people just get very overheated about it. But power, simply put, is the ability to act or produce an effect. The ability to act or produce an effect. And what's leadership? Again, leadership is very scary to people. Leadership is, by definition, the ability to show the way. You're showing the way and you're acting in power. And so one of the first things we talk about in the book is power in you, is trying to get into some of the ideas that people have that don't serve them well about power. The first line in the introduction is from a client of mine. She says, power needs a rebrand.
Bingo.
Right? Because people are very fraught about power. And here's a little secret. There are people that have power in the universe, and here's just an idea. They want to have you think that power is fraught, because if you don't think it's fraught, because if you do think it's fraught, you're not going to advocate for power, and they'll have power. I hate to be really critical or conspiracy theory. I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but I just think it's very true. This is sort of like, if we look at social equity issues and there are people who are in our society that do not have power, or more to the point, they do not perceive that they have power. And believe me, they are told every day that they don't have power in ways that are subtle and in ways that are not subtle, right? Our task as individuals, as human beings, is to not listen to those people. Our task is to understand that we have power. And so, people have said to me, Steve, why did you write a book about power? Aren't there enough power-hungry people in the world? And the truth of the matter is, if you look at, I would theorize that the number of people who have too much power in this world, yes, they get a lot of play, but there aren't that many of them. I'm more worried about the people who are underpowered than the people that are overpowered. We talk about in the book about how, you don't want to be wildly overpowered, because then you're like Chernobyl, you're like melting down, you're a nuclear reactor. And you don't want to be underpowered. You want to be centered in your power. So the first section of the book is about having that discussion about what power really is, how it's available to all, and that there are people who don't want you to have power. They don't, because they want to have power, right?
It feels like a zero-sum game. If you have it, then I don't. Or if I have it, you don't. There's not enough to go around.
And that is not the case. Everyone can have power. There is no shortage of power in the world. And that's why, in fact, you're seeing people start businesses at an unprecedented rate, because they want to act on what they want to do, and they want to, they want to be empowered. But we still tell ourselves all the time that we're not powerful.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'd love to make this really real. I think about people listening to this, people that I work with. Let's say you work in an organization. We may have all had this experience at one point or another, where I'm thinking back to my life, or maybe I had a supervisor or someone in a position above me that I just was maybe afraid of. I felt intimidated by them. And maybe there was that real archetypal, scary boss. And that might leave me as the underling feeling powerless. Like I can't speak up. I can't say anything because I'll get a bad reaction. I just have to play it safe, walk on eggshells, don't ruffle any feathers, and just try to get by. And I think a lot of people feel that dynamic in organizations, and it's sort of not talked about. Maybe we just expect it to be that way. And
we expect it to be that way. And sometimes the organizations are blind to that dynamic, and sometimes they wish to encourage that dynamic. But there's always ways. I think it's really refreshing when somebody says to a manager, we have this big problem. I'd like to take this on. Nobody expects that to happen. And that's a way of really distinguishing yourself.
I love it. Right? So we're on this track of defining what power is. And it sounds like now we're sort of moving into.
Right. The second important component of the book is the whole conversation of power and trust. And what we talk about in the book is that power comes from trust. Power doesn't come from a title. Yes, there are some people who want you to believe it does. Power doesn't come from money. Yes, having money is always better than not having money. Yes, power comes because you know somebody. All those things are true. But if you want real power, you need to earn trust. Managers, leaders have to understand that every day they have essentially a stock market ticker next to their head, and they're either being more trusted or less trusted. Nobody stays the same. And everybody has the opportunity to screw up every day. And if you're not aware of your trust factor, and if you're not trying to create more trust, then you're going to lose trust, and you're going to lose the ability to interact with and influence people. So trust is essential if you're going to lead. People have to trust and believe in you. And from your own experience, yours and the listeners, if there's somebody who's leading you that you don't trust, you're not going to really go out of your way for that person. You're not even going to necessarily follow that person. So we talk a lot about trust in the book.
Do you have any, I was thinking, I'm a numbers girl, imagining are there 1, 2, 3 things that a person could start practicing now to start building more trust?
Right. I think they're very good. I think there are a couple of things that right off the bat. Number one, you build trust through listening. Right? Go and talk to the people that are on your team. Ask them what's concerning them. Don't look at your phone. Don't look at your watch. Spend 20 minutes with them. Make eye contact. Be empathetic. Listen. That's a thing you can do. Then, secondly, do what you say you are going to do. If you're not going to do it, don't say. Too many people think, okay, well, I'll work on that. I'll get that done. And then they don't think people are paying attention. They think, oh, there's so many other things going on. They won't pay. No. Do what you say you're going to do. Okay? And then the third thing is, I think this is really important. It doesn't happen enough. If you make a mistake, tell people you made a mistake. People are so worried about their image. They don't understand that they get power by being trusted. You get trusted by listening, by doing, and then for asking for forgiveness if that's what you need to do. So those are 3 things right off the top of my head that I would say are really important, and they cost nothing. What they cost is a little bit of time and your genuine interest in what people have to say.
Yes. I can feel myself relaxed, just as you were saying, to admit if you made a mistake,
right?
To see somebody that might be in a position of authority or power, then saying, I messed this up, or there was a failure. I take ownership. It creates a sense of safety immediately for me. I feel like, okay, they're human just like me. We all make mistakes. And now when I make a mistake, I feel more comfortable coming to that person and admitting it as well and working through it.
Yeah. And I think it's part one is admitting the mistake. And part two, or saying, I was hoping I would get this done by this date. I need some more time. What people do is because they're embarrassed with failure. And so they say nothing. And that completely undermines their power.
Yep. I agree. I can understand that because then we lose trust.
Right. Because then we
Yes.
lose trust. And then the last two sections of the book are about communication and vision. People don't seem to think that they need to be able to articulate a vision. What are you trying to grow? What are you trying to do? Are you, not you, but you're not embarrassed about what you're doing it. So why can't you articulate a vision? And then the fourth part of the book is about communicating that vision. I worked at Apple from 1982 to 1991. I was the product introduction manager for the original Macintosh in 1983, 84. I worked with Steve Jobs for 3 years, and I saw how he, led. And he led, he had a reputation for being a little irascible, and I can tell you many Steve Jobs stories, but you knew that you were in the presence of greatness. He wanted to do something great. I've met with, many CEOs who just wanted to torture people because it made them feel better. That wasn't my experience with Steve. My experience with Steve was he was interested in doing something great, and he wanted you to be on that journey. Mm-hmm. So being able to communicate a vision, be able to articulate a vision, and communicate that vision. In one of the chapters of the book, is called "Use Your Words Carefully and Often." And I don't know about you, but I'm a big Shakespeare fan, even though I don't understand it. This is a author who's been, he wrote in the late 16th century. His works still endure. Every year I go to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. It's one of my favorite things to do. I've been going there since 2005. One of the plays I love the most is the Henry V play. And there's a soliloquy in here that I quote in the book. I said, William Shakespeare's 18th play, Henry V, was first performed in London's Globe Theatre around 1599. Based on the exploits of the real 15th century monarch, Henry takes a small army across the English Channel to fight the French and seize a disputed crown. On the fields near the French town of Agincourt, Henry realizes his forces are badly outnumbered. His chances of victory are slim, but he is not one to give up. And as Shakespeare tells the story, Henry gathered his troops and, flushed with inspiration, gave the following speech, which I'll just quote a tiny bit from. From this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. That's what people want. They want to be bound together in a sacred opportunity and a sacred mission. And too often we treat our work like it's not important. Mm-hmm. It is important. Mm-hmm. And if you're working in an organization that doesn't give you the sense that your work is important, get out of that organization. Because your work and the time you spend on the planet is important. It's unique. It's unlike any other that has ever happened. And you have to have a feeling that you matter, that you can have power, and that you can direct your life. And that you can, if you don't find yourself in an environment like that, you can create an environment where people feel like a band of brothers or a band of sisters, and that you can work together to accomplish something great. Because I've had that experience several times when I worked at Apple, when I worked for Steve, when I worked, on the Mac launch, when I worked in the internet, when I did my work in the nonprofit space. I've had that feeling that what I was doing was mattering, that I was contributing to something. And now, as I'm almost 70, I've got 2 other books that I want to write about leadership, and I'm doing it because, my time on the clock is limited. My beloved wife died when she was, in fact, today was going to be our 15th wedding anniversary. She died in December of 2010. And I'm really happy that I had that relationship, and I'm getting married later this year. We met in 2018. I'm really glad that I was able to experience love twice. And we all should have that opportunity and that ability. So I kind of droned on a little bit. I'm sorry, Crystal, but yeah,
I love the human part.
Yeah,
I love the human part. I'm wondering if I'm somebody I hear this and I go, oh no, I have no idea about my vision. I feel like I'm just in the weeds, barely keeping my head above water and just getting the day-to-day done. How do I even start to feel and identify what the vision may be?
Well, I always tell my kids, I have 2 adult kids, listen to your instincts. Your instincts are trying to tell you something. Your task is to listen to them. And the other thing is that it takes years to do this work. Steve started Apple in 1977. The Apple II came out in, I think, 1979. But, it took a long time for Steve Jobs to be Steve Jobs. Mm-hmm. But it takes that first step. It takes those steps to make that happen. And so if you're unclear what your vision is, be patient with yourself. Mm-hmm. You have an inkling right now of what it can be. Mm-hmm. What do you resonate with? What do you like? Who do you seek out? What do you read? What do you experience in social media? What would you really like to do? That's in there. It's in you. Give it a little opportunity to come out. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be 70 in November. It's a struggle all the time. I think back on, that line from that old movie, A League of Its Own, where Tom Hanks is telling Gina Davis, he's trying to convince her not to quit the baseball team. If it was easy, anybody could do it.
Yeah.
The hard is what makes it great. And anybody can do it because you're in control of your life. Nobody else is in control of your life. And if you feel they are, you're giving them way too much credit.
Yes. I appreciate your perspective on this so much. And I'm keeping an eye on the time. And I know that there's one more section here, like how once you've identified your vision, how do you communicate that? Would you like to speak to that as well?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Crystal. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. And thank you. So yeah, people think, well, I don't have to speak to it. People understand what they have to do. And it's like, no, you need to speak about it, and you need to speak about it all the time. Steve, when we were in the months before the launch of the Mac, he told us every time we met what the 3 key points of the Macintosh launch were. Actually, there were 4, but I can never remember the 4th one. But I can't remember 3 out of 4, and that was 40 years ago. So I'm not doing too badly. So he would constantly drill us on what the 4 key points of the Macintosh launch were, because people, forget, people drift, and it's really important. It creates safety and security to know what the modus operandi is, what the raison d'etre is, why I'm speaking in Italian and French, I have no idea. But why are we doing what we're doing? That's really important. And it's your job as a leader. It's part of your ability to show the way to again and again and again tell people why they're committing their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. Now I've just riffed over the Declaration of Independence, to your endeavor. Because people have all sorts of things they can do with their life. They, for whatever reason, have decided to align with you. You better give them a good reason every day why they should.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm so with you. I really love the existential flavor that you bring to this. I'd say one of my core foundational philosophical systems for me is existential. I've been thinking about it since I was a little kid that we're going to die. It's very evident to me. And that ticking clock, I feel it. And I think a lot about that for myself as well as the people I serve. Like, why do I exist as a coach? because I want people to enjoy their time on this planet as much as they can and to feel like it means something. So you're speaking to how, as a leader, by using your power effectively, you can help people unite around this vision, around something that really matters, and have their time and energy feel like it's well spent.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really important. I mean, it's the saddest thing I ever hear is I feel like I've wasted my life. Mm-hmm. And in truth, unfortunately, not that many people say it. But in truth, even if you feel like you've wasted your life, you've been garnering experience that you can use now, right? You can use that. I have a quote here from Martin Luther King that I have on my wall, and it says, "Faith is taking the first step, even when you can't see the whole staircase." Right?
Start now. Mm-hmm.
Start now.
I love this. All right. I want to ask you some rapid fire questions. I'm burning with curiosity as a man who's about to be 70 years old and still totally vivacious and doing all this cool stuff. Do you have any regular habits or routines that really help keep you so energized and engaged?
I work out every day or almost every day. And, it's kind of weird. I've always enjoyed working out. So it's always been a source of joy for me. But yeah, I work out every day. I think, I saw a picture of a guy when I was like 12 or something. He was probably a little younger than I am today. And he was like completely ripped. And I am not, I can tell you. But I said to myself, I do not want to get old like people conventionally get old. I just don't want to do it. So work out, and then choose your friends and your loved ones wisely. I have been with two really great women. They challenge me. They are funny. I mean, you have to change. You have to really be clear about who you want to spend your time with, and make sure you're spending time with the people that give you joy, and more than the joy, people who challenge you and people that are fun to be with. So that's the two things I would say.
I love that. Okay. How about one piece of advice, if you could go back to your younger self, when would that be? And what advice would you give?
I would say the most important thing clearly to me is don't be so self-critical. Right?
Yes.
I think that...
Was there an age where you really needed to hear that?
Oh, I think very much when I was at Apple in my 30s and 40s, absolutely. I was always very hard on myself, and yeah, for sure.
Yes, that's such a good piece of advice. I see that so often. The inner critic, how to set that aside and like, okay, I hear that piece of advice.
It does get better. I definitely am much less self-critical now than I was earlier in my life, for sure.
Yes, that is it's a wonderful piece of advice. My last one would be your experience in working with anybody that's been supportive along the way, mentors, coaches, consultants. I like to bring this in as people are listening to this and they're thinking, I'm on this journey. I'm trying to improve my abilities as a leader. Have you ever worked with anybody in the past that's helped you in your journey? And can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I, in fact, dedicated my book to 6 people who were really important to me. Deidre Barber, who's a good friend of mine, who's a queer woman who I love, and I've learned so much about power from her. Charles M. Cook Jr., Charlie, he was one of my first mentors, and he died about a decade ago. His greatest joy was that he was on Nixon's enemies list. He was a liberal Republican back when those things really existed, and he was a really fantastic guy. Steve Jobs, John Lewis, Machiavelli, and then finally my old boss, John Vasconcellos, who was the assemblyman from the 23rd Assembly District. And he, in the state of California, I was his chief of staff for a number of years, and learned a lot from John, and learned a lot from Charlie, and learned a lot from Steve, all those people. So, and then of course Deidre, who has definitely been a blessing, in my life. So.
Wonderful. I really appreciate you bringing those people in. I'm going to be Googling some of those names later, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in closing today, 2 more questions. One would be, if we were going to put everything into a nutshell, what you shared today about power, do you have like a statement, a wish that you'd like people to, like a take-home message to the people listening today?
Yeah, I would say live in your power. Wonderful. Connect with your power. Understand that you have power. Even if the organizational or societal structures that are arrayed against you are telling you don't, you do.
People, listen to this man. Also, he has a book. If you need more help, check that book out. And, Steve, today, if you'd like to let people know where they can find you, how they can connect with you, they have questions, they want to find out more.
Yeah, absolutely. People can feel free to email me at steve@stevescheier.com. That's SCHEIER. Our Facebook is at Steve Scheier. Our Twitter is at Steve_Scheier. And Instagram, we're Steve Scheier Author. And the website is stevescheier.com. Amazingly, it's all the same name. It's hard to believe. And my book is Power Up. And it is entirely focused on the cannabis space, but the lessons in it really, I wrote it about cannabis because I'm spending a lot of time there, but really the lessons in the book can be applied to any organization. So please reach out. Happy to talk to you.
All right, great, Steve. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been just fantastic to talk to you.
All right. You take care, Crystal.
Thank you. You too. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you feel stoked after listening to this episode. And as always, I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Is there a topic that you want to know more about? Please let me know. And thank you again for subscribing and sharing your favorite episodes with others. It really means a lot.